Hello, hello. We will go into our lesson here on economic development planning. Hopefully, it's interesting. I know a few of you here in class thought that you might want to be economic development planners as your type of planner you want to be. So let's get started. So let's kind of set the scene here. What we're talking about with economic development planning, it's important to think about this idea that cities are in competition with each other. They are competing to attract firms, to attract business, to attract industry. They're competing to get people to live there. So it's this idea that cities are competing with one another to attract economic drivers. And so all 50 states and then several thousand local municipalities, they make serious efforts to promote their own economic development. And economic development planning is a major subspecialty of the planning profession. Cities are all really into um, promoting economic development. So, just some historic roots. Give us a little bit of history, is that early efforts at economic development planning, they focused on transportation, and they were initiated by the commercial elite, kind of like these top business owners, as they tried to gain a competitive advantage. So it's this competition, that they wanted to get a competitive advantage over other cities. So some early efforts here, if you look at the Erie Canal is a really good example where canal building is like canals as a type of transportation. So the Erie Canal carried tons of freight every year, which gave New York this economic advantage over its main competitors, which at the time were Boston and Philadelphia. So another, canal building kind of ended, and then there was more of this focus once we had railroads and railroad technology was developed. There were competition between cities and towns to be on a rail line. So it's this idea that where early efforts, like early economic development, focused on transportation, because if you were near that railroad, or the example of you could use something like the Erie Canal, build a canal to help transport goods, then you are going to have an economic advantage over other places. And then another kind of form this took was in manufacturing, when our country was relying on this manufacturing economy. Instead of having this kind of textile manufacturing in the New England area that was really booming, these southeastern governments and merchants were recruiting these manufacturers. So that's part of it, was like trying to get these textile manufacturers to move south. So that's kind of what early economic development looks like. So let's look at a little bit about the federal government involvement. There's all these different levels of government: federal, state, and local levels. But the federal government involvement in economic development, it really had to do with this idea of structural unemployment. And what this means is a mismatch between the supply of labor and the demands for labor. So what this was is, like, after World War II, we started seeing one thing is this skills mismatch. And what this meant is, as industry was declining, you saw high unemployment rates among industrial workers, but then, like, at the same time, you have this growth in the healthcare industry. So this is kind of what's going on, like a big overall thing is, industry work is down, healthcare work is up. So you've got unemployment in industrial workers, but like something like a shortage in nurses. So this is what we mean by a skills mismatch. And then there's a geographic mismatch where one area will lose jobs because a firm moves out. This is something like the northeastern, like the Rust Belt cities like Detroit. These auto plants moved out, so that area like Detroit lost a lot of jobs because the firm moved out. Or there could be a change in technology that reduced labor needs, like when we kind of went through the Industrial Revolution, and all of a sudden farming equipment was mechanized technology. There was like technology to do agricultural work, so you didn't need as many people to do that type of labor, to do that farming work. They were kind of forced to do other work. So it's this idea, I mean, think about like technology, automation, robots, you could say, replacing human workers. This is going to kind of shift in jobs. So what happened is you had these federal programs that tried to direct federal funds to economic development activities in these kind of declining or lagging areas. So that's kind of the federal level. Now, just looking at the state level quickly, state economic development efforts. Really, like states promote themselves. States have really become increasingly involved in these major industrial and commercial relocation and expansion, and states are increasingly willing to spend large sums of money to attract economic activity. So the idea of like in New Orleans, Chevron, some of these oil companies like left New Orleans and moved to Houston. This idea of major industries and these commercial facilities relocating from like one city to another, or something like Sears, like the Sears building that was in Chicago moved out to what is it called? These suburbs in Chicago. I'm like forgetting the name right now. But this idea that like firms are moving and or they're expanding. They want to like build a new location, and states are spending a lot of money to try and attract businesses. So states first they want to attract new businesses, and they also want to retain the business they already have. So states will do things. They have these tools. They'll give these financial incentives such as tax credits, low interest loans, infrastructure grants, labor force training grants. I feel like we've kind of gone over some of this in class before. These type of tax credits, low interest loans, these are tools that states will use. States will spend a lot of money, like they will spend a lot of money to attract new businesses. And there's this really interesting kind of ethical political question is really what choice do cities have? If I started this lecture with cities are in competition with each other, what choices do cities have? Well, governors and mayors don't have much choice. They really have to offer these substantial incentives, these public subsidies to corporations. Um, that's really it's like because if they don't offer it, the next city over, their competition is going to offer it. So local cities don't really have a lot of choice here, and that's this, like, remember, it's all about this competition. And then the kind of the political part of this is, would you want to be the elected official who let a major industry and all its jobs leave town? um, you guys probably know by now, I love this research I do on the sports industry, and maybe we'll talk more about this because it's really kind of a perfect example of states investing a lot of money to build stadiums and invest, like give payments to the teams to keep them. And who would ever want to be the mayor or the governor that let their like beloved sports team leave town? So these sports teams are actually able to leverage a lot of public money. They get a lot of these financial incentives to stay in the state. And so, kind of what? So, what's the issue here? Is it just these large amounts of public subsidies that are offered in the name of economic development? And usually, this means if we spend, like, as a state, as a government, if we spend this money to um, get a business here or retain a business, we're going to have more jobs, we're going to have increased tax revenues. But the truth is, this may or may not actually happen, because that's the problem. It's like, well, if you're spending money in the name of economic development, it's good, right? We're developing the economy. This is supposed to be growth. This is supposed to be more jobs, more tax base, more revenue. But the issue is that all this public financing, all these incentives, all the subsidies, they don't necessarily have a positive economic benefit. So that's kind of the issue. Not all economic impact reports are created equal. What I mean by that is that you'll get like these civic boosters. It kind of depends on who writes the economic impact report, right? Like who does the study. They can kind of make the numbers say one thing or another, depending on what kind of equations you use, how you measure the economic impact. It can paint a really different picture than what reality is. And also, it's hard to pinpoint something that's good for everyone. That's another part of the issue. It's like, okay, well, as a government, as a city, we're gonna spend all this money to on this program to promote economic development, but it's okay that we're going to spend this money because the benefit is going to be good for everyone. Um, that's kind of difficult to assess, right? Because it really is hard to pinpoint something that's good for everyone. There's a lot of critiques that some of the economic development activity really only benefits a few. It really only benefits the elite. upper class, that kind of thing. I remember this was first kind of established by the elite. So anyway, that's you can ask me any questions you want when we have class. That's kind of the real overview intro to economic development at the just really an introduction. And in our next presentation, we'll go through more of what you could do, like if you were a local municipality, you're an economic development planner, more of the type of stuff that you would do.